All right, so welcome to our workshop, Customizing Confluence with Forge. Today's workshop is primarily geared towards a beginner developer with Forge and Confluence. So if you're really new to Forge, this is the training for you. If you have some experience with Forge and have built something with Confluence, this might not be the right training for you, but please listen and follow along. Maybe you'll learn something. But we'll definitely be beginning a Forge app from scratch and building something by the end of it. Let's just talk about prerequisites. Really, there are a couple of things that you should have already set up before joining today. One being a Atlassian Cloud development instance, and you can get one by going to go.atlassian.com/cloud-dev if you don't already have one. The Forge CLI should be installed, as well as a Docker CLI should be installed so that we can use Forge Tunnel. So if you don't have those things installed, I would try getting those installed quickly before our first hands-on set of exercises. The repo has a link to the slides in the README as well, so you just need the first link. But there are two helpful links here that you should grab before we start. One being the reference hands-on code repo. This repo think of it more as an answer key than something that you should be running. There are a number of folders within the repo, and each folder represents what the code should look like by the end of that exercise. I also posted these slides to speakerdeck.com, so you can go to that link there. You can actually download a PDF, which I would advise to do so that you can click the links, copy the links, and use the links throughout this presentation. Also, you could use the slides as reference for the exercises. Use these slides as you would see fit to be able to do the work that you need to. So I make those available to you as well. So hopefully you have access to the code repo and the slides. All right, let's take a look at the agenda. We're going to be doing, we're going to break this out into 5 different sections. First is, what is Forge? I'm just going to take a quick peek at what Forge is, take a look at the history. Now we're going to start building an app and getting that set up. Now we're going to break it out into 3 different ways of building that app. One, how do we make API calls? How do we use Forge storage in our app? And then how do we extend Confluence? In our instance, we're going to use the macro component. So what I always like to do when I do a training on how to build an app for our products is just start with a little history about how we got to where we are today with Forge, and it's a long journey. It started back in 2001, where the code for our products was open sourced, and before plugins were even created, users could download the source of Jira and modify their own instances. And so they would download the source, modify it, and basically share that around. And that was really the start of like extending our products. So in 2004, we had the first generation of a plugin architecture, or an SPI, a service provider interface, which is basically a fancy name for an API that allows you to provide additional functionality to the host application. And we called it Atlassian plugins. It was a naive Java implementation of a plugin system that was written from scratch. In 2008, we upgraded that to the second generation called Plugins 2, or as we call it, P2, which is OSGI-based dynamic loading, dependency isolation, and other features. Plugins are written in Java, and it's still used today for our server products as well as our data center products. And if you're looking to build an add-on for those products, you would use P2. A little bit further along down the road, in 2014 was our first cloud-based and our 3rd generation set of apps or plugin framework, called Atlassian Connect, which was web-based. It was loosely coupled. It was language agnostic plugin implementation that provides web APIs and required a cloud integration. So you as the plugin vendor would host your Atlassian Connect plugin and then talk to our product over a REST API, HTTP sort of communication style. And now today, Atlassian Forge is the next generation platform for extending and customizing Atlassian products, which became generally available in 2021. It offers advantages over Atlassian Connect with Forge, developer experience, simplified development, improved performance, enhanced security, and a seamless user experience. So some advantages of Forge, we host it, you build it. So Forge apps are fully hosted by Atlassian. So when you build a Forge app, Atlassian automatically creates your development, staging, and production environments. And so this was designed to make operating your app easier and more secure, and to save you time and running costs. With Forge, you're in control of how and when data leaves Atlassian Cloud. So as a function as a service platform, Forge takes care of authentication, identity, scaling, and tenancy. And UIKit allows you to quickly and easily build UIs using pre-built components. And for more advanced use cases, there's custom UI, which allows you to define your own user interface. We're going to be using UIKit today to build our app just to make it easy and use the pre-built components. There's a few different reasons why you'd want to build a Forge app. There's a marketplace opportunity. Maybe you have an idea that you want to monetize by selling it on the Atlassian marketplace. You want to customize your user experience to meet a specific need or preference for your business. You want to process automation. So automating repetitive tasks, streamline workflows, and eliminate manual processes. Integrate external tools, enabling seamless data exchange and collaboration between different tools. And solve business needs, address specific pain points or requirements within your organization. All right, let's talk about building an app. So one of the best ways of learning a new technology is by building, especially if somebody is building it with you. So that's what we'll do today. We'll build an app together and learn all about the functionality that we'll need to make the app work, all in 90 minutes or 75 minutes. As inspiration for an app to build, we're going to go back to the 90s. A time when the internet was just starting to figure out how it was going to change the world, back before search engines like Google really made it easy to find anything on the internet. But before we can find that inspiration, we need to get connected. Like I said, back then it was really hard to find sites of interest as Google was still being built, and other sites like Yahoo, Ask Jeeves, and also Alta Vista were not the best at bringing back great results. Back then, there was a community tool called the Web Ring. Now, a web ring was a collection of websites linked together in a circular structure and usually organized around a specific theme, often educational or social. You joined the web ring community that your website fit and added some code to your site, which would add a functional set of links that would take you to the next or previous site in the ring of websites. So when someone landed on a site in the web ring community, there was a good chance they might find your site through the web ring navigation. So we're going to build a page ring macro for Confluence. The macro, when inserted onto a page, also inserts the page into the page ring, and the macro will display the page ring navigation and will be styled using Forge's UI kit. So here's a preview of what we're going to be building. So it's just a little line a macro will add to a page, which has links to the previous page in the web ring and the next page in the web ring, and just a little title that says, hey, this is the Confluence page ring. What I like about this simple app is I don't think anybody's going to steal it and monetize it for the marketplace, but it also features a number of things that we can learn when building this app. We'll learn about how to extend a macro, utilizing UIKit. We'll learn about how to call Confluence REST APIs. We'll learn about using Forge storage, and we'll obviously learn how to use the Forge CLI to deploy our app. Speaking of Forge CLI, let's start there, setting up our app. So with the Forge CLI installed, we want to go to our terminal and we would call Forge create. And Forge create will create an app within the current directory of wherever that command is ran. You'll give it a name for your app. In this screenshot, I'm calling it hello-world-app. And then it will ask you to select a template to create some files for your app, the bare needed files for the app. We're going to select a category. We're going to be using UIKit, so we're going to use the UIKit category, and we're going to select a template, and we're going to use the Confluence macro template. There's a whole bunch of different categories and different templates to choose from. You can explore that on your own, but what will get us mostly there is the Confluence macro template. Once you select that, it'll go and create the app and create the files necessary, downloading the template, registering the app, creating the environments, and installing the dependency, everything on the back end of creating the Forge app for you. On the next screen, we'll start by deploying the app. We call Forge deploy, which packages up the app and sends it up into the development environment of Forge for your app. So it's not installed yet. It's just sort of packaged up and sitting up there in the cloud, waiting for you to install it. So you can see the steps here. It packages up your app files. It uploads the app. It validates that the manifest file is correct, which should be since we haven't touched it yet. It does some snapshotting functions and then deploys it to the environment, our development environment in this case. And then the last thing we need to do is run Forge install. So we need to select the product that our app is using. So we need to make sure that we're selecting Confluence. We don't want to you can accidentally install it into Jira or Compass. We want to make sure we select Confluence, then enter your site. So this would be the site URL of your developer instance that you've created at go.atlassian.com/cloud-dev. Here's my instance, confluence-forge-dev-day-23.atlassian.net. It's a mouthful. And then you basically say, do you want to install this with the scopes that it has, which is just the scope read me. You say yes, and it will install that into your Confluence instance. And then it's ready to go. We could test to see that the hello world macro is installed, and that's what we will do next in our first hands-on sort of exercise. Here's the steps that I'd like you to go through. And so I'd like you to run Forge create in a terminal window, create a new app called Confluence-page-ring. Select the template category UIKit, and then select the template Confluence macro. You're going to CD into the new directory that Forge created. Run Forge deploy, run Forge install, selecting Confluence, and give it your developer instance. And then you're going to go to your Confluence instance that you've created, create a page, and type in the body of your page, type / and then start typing Confluence page ring, and you should see the macro that this new app has created available for you to select and add to your page. And if you haven't done it so far at this point yet, you can download and clone the code repo. So you guys are getting through this task here. I'm going to just go over to my terminal window here and just start running this command here. So we're going to run Forge create, and we're going to enter a name for our app, Confluence PageRing. Getting the template list. We're going to hit UI kit, and we're going to select Confluence macro. Creating our app. All right. So here we've got our code already loaded. You can see our manifest file with our title, Confluence PageRing, and the key and our app ID. So the next thing we're going to do is do Forge deploy. So I've got a terminal window in Microsoft Visual Studio Code, and I'm just going to run that here. So Forge deploy. So you start by doing a lint. Just to make sure there's no issues. And then we're deploying it by packaging up our app files, uploading the app, validating the manifest, and deploying to our environment. So we're waiting for that to come back. They're all deployed. The next thing we want to do is Forge install. So that will install our app. And so we select our product. So make sure we select Confluence. Enter the site URL. All right, that was a mouthful. So I'm just going to go over here. Let's select copy, back, paste it. Yes, I want to install into that Atlassian site. Okay, so now if I go back to my developer instance and hit create a page, say my first page, and then do Confluence PageRing. Here is my macro, and it should say hello world. Oh, page ID is not defined. Okay. I think what's happening is it's getting an older version of my Confluence PageRing. Yes. Let me see if I can fix that real quick. Forge. I'm going to just try uninstalling it. Uninstall. Not here. On terminal window. And just do Forge uninstall. And then we try Forge install again. See if I can get this to clear out. All right. All right, I'll try to get this fixed at the next hands-on, but let's continue on. That should have said hello world. All right. The next thing we're going to talk about is API calls. And what we're going to do is call a Confluence API from Forge. And for our app, we want to do 3 different things. We want to be able to request info on the current page, get the title of the current page, and then display the title on the page. So things we'll need a product context and update state. So this is coming from the Forge UI package, npm package. And we have installed this with the UI kit and template. So these are two different functions that we'll be able to use. The product context will help us understand information about the page that we're sitting on or the content we're sitting on. And then update state will allow us to dynamically update information within our code or within our view state and be able to dynamically look at that information in our page. We're going to need a product authentication fetch package. So this is coming from the Forge API NPM package, and this needs to be installed. We're going to be calling the endpoint get page by ID, which is part of the new Confluence version API version 2. And that endpoint looks like /pages/ and then the ID that we're going to send into it. All right, so let's dive into this a little bit further. So like I said, we're going to be using some UI kit hooks. So these are functions that let you manage the data you need to render your app. So uState is a function that adds and updates local state to a component. So this returns an array of 2 elements. The first element is the current state of the hook. The second value is a function that we can use to update the state. So the argument of this function is the value of the new state. So if we look at the code example that was provided in the docs, which you can find at the link at the bottom here, you can see on that first highlighted line, uState, we're just setting that to 0. And so that is going to be the value of count that is in the array that we're declaring on the other side of the equal statement. And then we have set count, and that is the function that we can use and call to update our state or update count whenever we want to. So if we look at the rendered component button here, we can see the text is saying count is the variable count. So we're using a template literal here, and count is the variable from that gets assigned from uState. And then we have an on-click event, and we have a function that's just calling set count, and we're incrementing count by 1. So here we can say every time we click the button, count should be incremented because we're grabbing the count value, and then we're also using the state hook function to increment that function. So in our app, we're just going to use the value. We're not going to use the function to update the state because we're only going to be doing it once. Use product context. So this reads the context in which the component is currently running. So we can call this function and get a whole bunch of information back about the context of where the macro is living. And we'll explore what this returns in just a moment. So to be able to use both of these functions, we need to declare these functions up in the import statement for Forge UI. So our template already has a bunch of things already declared, like Forge UI, and then a bunch of functions that are already being used in the templated code. So like render and fragment, macro and text. But then we can declare use product context and use state. Again, here's an example of use product context. As we call this, it gets assigned the context, and we can console.log out the context by doing a JSON.stringify, so we can actually see the information. That otherwise we'll just get object. And then what we'll want to pull out is the content ID, which is in our case, there will be the page ID of where the macro is sitting. And so here is an example of what console.log will spit out, which there's a few different things like account ID and cloud ID and local ID and the install context that I just sort of masked. So because it did have some key information there that I didn't want to, let you guys see, but that'll be like, a GUID of characters for the account ID and cloud ID, all those areas there. But the content ID is what we're looking for, and you can see that's just an ID of the number of the page ID that we're looking for. And there's a whole bunch of other things that we could find useful at some point. The space key ID. In our case, we're calling this from a macro, so it's seeing that it's a type macro. We can see what kind of type we're working on, what the module key is, all that kind of stuff. And then on our other console.log context.content ID, we're going to be pulling back that content ID, and we'll get back 393217. All right, so those are that is like sort of the one call there, the use product context that we need to basically get the information about the page so that we can do the next thing, which is be able to call the API. So we need a fetch API. So this will make requests to Atlassian product APIs within your Forge app. And so we need another package. We need the Forge API package. This was not installed with the template. And this is the Forge API is basically a partial implementation of Node Fetch. So if you've ever used Node Fetch before, you sort of have an idea of what's going on there, which fetches data from an HTTP server. But it handles the product authentication for us. So it's really a partial implementation, but it also extends it so that it works easily with our products. So what we'll need to do before we can use it is go back to our terminal and run npm install app Forge API. And so once we have that installed, then we can use that. So here is a copy and paste from the endpoint for get page by ID from Confluence version 2 of the API. And you can see as we parse this out, we need an import statement up at the top. We need to import the API. We'll also need to import a function called route. We'll get to that in a second. And we're doing that from @Forge API. Next, we need to call our API. And let's parse this out together here. So all of this is doing this asynchronously. So we're going to use the await function just so that we wait for this information to come back. So the first part here is, how do we want to call our endpoint? Do we want to do it as the user of the app? So I'm logged in into Confluence. So API.asUser will call the endpoint as me. Or if you're navigating the page, it will call it as you. And so that call will have all of the permissions that you have. So it will return it back to you. If you don't have access to that page, you won't get any information back. As an example. There's also API.asApp. So an app can have different permissions as a user, and you can call an Atlassian API as the app using the app user, and this call will work regardless of who used the app. So you could potentially use this to get back information about all of the pages. It might be best to use this kind of call for trying to do a report or something for an admin, and you can maybe count all the pages, even those that you as the user don't have access to. Really simple example. But we're going to use the API as user in our app here so that we can just call information about the page that we're on. All right, the next is request Confluence. So there's two different ways, two different methods here that we could call. We could say request Confluence, or we could say request Jira, and you could basically cross call an endpoint cross product. We're just going to worry about requesting Confluence APIs at this point. So we want request Confluence, and there's a whole bunch of things. There's a couple of options here that we want to call within that function. The first one being the route. And so the route is a tag template function, which takes the path of the endpoint that we're calling, and it will uh, basically parse that out and construct the path that's passed to the product fetch APIs. So route actually runs an encode UI component on each interpolated parameter in the templated string. And this helps protect against security vulnerabilities such as path reversal and query string injection. And so one thing I want to point out here is this is using a template literal. And so the template literal here, you have the $sign. This sort of syntax is grabbing this variable content ID and putting it into this path. And then route is doing some, encoding on that and making sure this is secure. One thing I want to point out, if I go back to the examples that I copied and pasted from the REST APIs, from the reference documentation on our docs, so the link down there at the bottom, it does just sort of mention ID here, right? But there's no $sign. So this actually did trip me up, and I do want to just call this out so that you guys don't get tripped up on this either. If you copy and paste the calls, which are great, right? You can call, copy and paste the Forge call, and that's basically all this is. It doesn't have the $sign in here, and so I put content ID in here and had the worst luck for about an hour trying to figure out why this didn't work, but I just needed the $sign. So the reference documentation is just telling you, hey, this needs an ID and you need to provide it. But then the template literal is a different syntax, but it looks close enough that it could trip you up. Okay. There's some documentation down there at the bottom. On the bottom there about template literals and encode URI component if you want to learn more about those things. And then the next is our next hands-on calling a Confluence REST API. And so what we're going to do here is do a collaborative hands-on. So I'm going to give you some time to look over the code, run the install Forge API, to get the Forge API package into your newly created project, create a product context and save the content ID to a variable is what we're going to do. Then we're going to create a function called fetch page that takes in the context and content ID and returns the page title of the current page. We're going to call this new fetch page function using useState, and we're going to update the manifest.yml and add the scope needed for that reference function. So each, or I don't have this on a slide, each, when you look at the reference documentation, it will tell you what scopes each endpoint needs. So we can go to the documentation and see that this is going to need a specific scope for that endpoint. All right, just to navigate through the repo. So what we're going to be doing here in a collaborative hands-on, we're going to be coding what you'll see here in the first folder, one API calls. And so the code here is what we're going to be working on in the source index.jsx file. And we're also going to be touching the manifest file as well. All right, so let's go back to what we need to do. So first thing we need to do is we need to run this MPI or npm install Forge API. So let's go to our code window. So npm install at Forge API. So we need to do that first. So this will get that installed. Processing. All right, we can fund 16 packages if we want to. Next thing we will do is start utilizing our MPI input. We need to import our package. So let's do that first. So we import API. We're going to need route from Forge API. All right. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the content ID of the page we're on to be able to call the API to get the page title. All right, so we need to declare use product context, and then we're going to create a variable called context and call use product context. Let's console out the information so that we can see the output of this stuff. And then we're going to just make sure we get the content ID as well. Make sure see what that is. All right. And then let's create our function. So the first thing we're going to use state. So we'll declare that first. So this function takes in the content ID of the page the macro is sitting on, and then requests the page through the API. The function returns the page title. So let's create our function called fetch page. It's be an asynchronous function. So we say async so that we can call it await on it, pass in the content ID that we're going to pass in. We're going to call the get page by ID API as the user displaying the app. We're going to use Confluence API version 2. Here's a link to the documentation. I have it memorized, every single letter. Okay, so let's start our API call. So we're going to get a response back. We want to call await because we want to wait. This is an asynchronous function. We want to wait for it to come back. We're going to call it as user, request Confluence, and we're going to create our route /wiki/API/v2/pages, and then the content ID that we've passed into the function. Our second set of parameters there is the headers that we're going to accept application JSON. We're going to get our response back, and we're going to shape it into JSON and save that into a variable called data, and then we're going to return back data.title. Okay, next thing we're going to do is make our call. So call the fetch page function and passing in the content ID. And we'll use the use state function here from the UI kit to help us with calling the asynchronous function and then updating the state. So we're going to do const. We just need the title, so we're not even going to ask for the function. We're going to use state. We're going to create an async function, and we're going to await the fetch page, passing in the content ID. We're going to get the title or console log the title to make sure that we got it, and then we're going to update our fragment, our HTML components, our UI kit components here, and just make our macro display the title that we grabbed. So basically, it's just going to repeat the same page title that we have. All right, one more step. We need to update the scope. So we need a read page Confluence scope that as defined in our documentation. All right, so let's save this page. Let's save the index.js page. All right, so we're going to do a Forge deploy again, and you'll see why in a second. All right, I'm going to stop this real quick. So here's an interesting thing. So the Forge CLI works in Node only in versions Node 16 and 18. Because this is a new code window, I hadn't done this before, but we can switch and use a program called MVM, and it allows you to switch versions of Node that really easily, especially on a project basis. So here I can say MVM use, let's use the latest version of Node 18. So I can say MVM use 18. There we go. Now we can go back to Forge deploy, and it will deploy that for us using the right version of Node. So we're packaging things up, and we should get a little message at the end here. Because we touched the manifest file, we'll need to reinstall with an upgrade parameter. So once this is done deploying, so there you see the little message there, and it even gives you the command we can run. So Forge install upgrade. And so this will upgrade our app with the new manifest file. So anytime you add, and it's asking you to just confirm which site we want to add this to, yes. We want to add it with the new scope, and it should be added. So now if I go to my Confluence page that I had before, and I just refresh this page, we should see testing new app. Oh, here we've added new scopes, so we need to allow that access for the new scope. And so here we can see we can view page content. We hit accept, and so now this will refresh, and we should see testing there, testing new app. So this is calling the API, getting that title, and displaying it here. So great success. We've done it. All right, let's continue on. All right, next we're going to talk about Forge storage. So Forge storage stores a JSON value with a specified key. So it's a key value pair, really. It's really easy. Data stored isn't shared between Forge apps on the same or different sites. So when you use Forge storage, it's smart enough to know to save that data specifically for your app for that specific instance. There's no shared data there. Forge storage is subject to quotas and limits, and I did provide a link to the documentation there so that you can read more about that. I believe it's measured in megabytes, but we're not going to run into that for our app, so I'm not going to worry about that too much right now. But you can read more into that for your needs. We're going to need a new scope storage app scope added to our manifest file, and again, we're going to use, we need to import the storage function from the Forge API package. So we've already got the API package installed, so we just need to declare storage in our import statement. And the types of values that you can save into Forge storage, we can use arrays, booleans, numbers, objects, strings. In our app, we're going to save an array. We're going to save all of the arrays, save an array of page IDs that are part of our PageRing into Forge storage. Really, there's three different functions of Forge storage. There's this one, setting a value. And so we can see here, we are importing storage from our Forge API. And then we would just call storage.set and then give it the key name and then give it a value. And so in our app, we would create a variable or an array variable here we're initializing. And then we're going to push a page ID onto that array. And then we're going to set that into a key called PageRing. And so very simple, just to set the value. Again, docs there, link to the docs at the bottom of the slide. Getting a value, very simple, just using the get function. So here we're assigning a value fs data, and we're waiting because storage.get is a asynchronous function, and we're going to pass it in the key. So in a more real world example here, fs data is awaiting storage.get. We pass it in the key page-ring, and we'll console that, log that out, and we'll get 3569276, which is the page ID that we saved in this example. Another thing we won't do in the exercises here, but might be something that you want to do if you want to clear all of the values out, is deleting a value. So storage.delete and just give it the key name. So we're going to be using an array. So doing this storage.delete will basically delete the entire array. So we're not actually going to handle deleting individual pages out. So once a page is in, it's in forever, unless you delete everything out. But that's what we can clear that if we needed to, like reset our value. And I did that in development a couple of times. I needed to reset all my pages so that I could create pages in order. That's it. That's Forge storage. But the collaborative hands-on is actually going to be pretty intense. So I would go to the second folder here, and what we're going to do, and this is very simplified, these steps, we're going to do three things. We need to do three things to set the page ID into the page ring. We need to test to see if the page is already stored first in the page ring. So we don't want to save it again. We don't want multiple page IDs in Forge storage. So if it's already been in Forge storage, we don't want to save it again. So we need to test to see if the page is already stored, and let us know if it is or not. Second, we need to, if it's not, then we need to save the content ID into an array, into the array from Forge storage, and then save it back into Forge storage. And then finally, we need to know what the adjacent page is in the desired direction. So because we need to know what is the page ID that comes previous to it, and what's the page ID that comes after it, and so the next and previous. So we need to pass in a direction and that kind of thing. So my suggestion here over the next 5 minutes is, instead of coding, because we'll do the live coding together, open up the folder number 2 in the repo and just take a look at index.jsx and look at I'm calling it business logic, because there's a lot of business logic here that we really don't need to, I'm not really teaching, but it's really handy for identifying the page ID, and is it stored, is it not stored, how do we store it, how do we get that information, and then go and store it, and then how do we get the adjacent ID, and what do we do when we're at the end of the array or the beginning of the array, and how do we loop that around? So there's a lot of code there, but especially when we only looked at like 3 lines of Forge storage code of set, get, and delete. So take a look at that. Okay, so let's just go back and refresh ourselves. So we need to test that the page is already stored, save the content ID into an array and into Forge storage, and get the adjacent page in the direction desired. All right, well, first thing we need to do though is we need to add the storage app scope. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to do a deploy here right now, just because we'll need to do another Forge install upgrade because we've updated our scope. So let's get that done and out of the way with first. Let's see yellow text that says run Forge install upgrade. We do. Forge, install, upgrade. And choose our instance. Yes, we want the new stuff. Okay, now if we go back to our page and just hit refresh again, we should be asked to yes, allow access for the new scope. Yes, accept. Okay, let's go back to coding. All right, next step. Let's go back to our index page and let's add the storage function to our import statement. And then let's go down and let's create a key that we're going to use on all of our calls to all of our Forge storage calls. So that we don't have to remember that, we can just use the storage key variable. All right. All right, so next is we're going to create a function called isPageID_stored. This is first thing we're doing here is we're getting the key, we're getting the array and saving it to array, and we're going to see if the array exists. So if array PageRing, and if it does exist, if it doesn't exist, we're returning -1. So and then where's the page ID? Okay, and then if the array exists, then we can return the index of where the page ID exists within the array. So if it doesn't exist, this will return a -1 as well. We're deleting the call to test page because we don't need that at the moment. We'll use a different call here, so lots of deleting going on. And then we're going to we're going to get the page ID of the page that we're on. So context.content ID. So we're going to save that to a variable so we can use that in calls. And then we're going to ask for the page ID index. And so we're going to use state and call isPageID_stored and pass in the page ID. And so what happens is we call this function. If it has it has an index, that's meaning it's in the array, it'll return the index 0 to whatever. If it's not, it'll return -1. And so we can use that in our next step. All right, so if we need to store it, let's create a function called store page ID. So again, we're going to pass in a page ID. We're going to get the value already stored so we can append to it. So we need to do a storage.get here and get our array. So, passing in the storage key. So if the value has not been set yet, so we initialize the variable as an array. So there could be a chance that we haven't set the array yet. Haven't created the array at all. So the storage at that key doesn't have anything in there. So we'll initialize it, and then we'll push the page ID onto the array. And now is the part where we get to set the array to Forge storage and return the index of the new page. So await storage.set, storage key, and the array, and then we return the index of the page ID. All right, so now we just see if the page ID is less than 0. If it is, is page ID stored? If it is -1, then we can call storage page ID so that we actually save that page ID that into Forge storage. All right, next step is we need a get adjacent page ID function. And this is a little bit more complicated. It's going to take two parameters, the page ID index and the direction. So direction is going to be 1 or -1. So 1 will be next, -1 will be previous. We get the array from storage. We need to know the length of the array. And then if direction is 1, meaning are we going next? We see if we want to know if the index of the page is at the end of the array. And if it is, we want to loop around to the beginning. So the next page will actually be the first indexed item in the array. So if page ID index +1, because it's 0 based, equals the array length, we'll return the first item in the array. Else, we just select the next item. So page ID index +1 from the array. And then for the else clause, so if direction does not equal 1, so if it's -1, we want we want to test to see if the page is at the beginning of the array. The page ID is at the beginning of the array. Then if so, we want to loop around to the end of the array and grab the end there. And so that's what we're doing there. So if page ID index equals 0, we want to return the array length -1. So again, 0 based arrays, that will get the one at the end. So the key things here are we're passing the array length -1, and then if it's not, we can just go one back. We do array page ring page ID index -1. So we're just incrementing the index by 1. All right, hopefully that makes sense. A lot of logic there for our app to work. We're going to update our fetch page. We're going to return just not the title. We're going to return all of the data from the response so that we can. There are some key things that we want to grab from that. We want to be able to grab the URL, the title. So those two things. So multiple things besides just the title. All right. All right. So now we're going to make a couple of calls here. We're going to call useState to get the adjacent previous page. So I'll pass in the page ID index of the page that we're on and -1. And then we'll get an ID from that, the previous ID from that. And then we can call fetch page to, so the previous ID is coming from the Forge storage array. And then we can call fetch page to get information about that page and save that to previous page. And we'll use that in displaying in our next step here. All right, the other thing we want to do is we want to get the next ID, the next page ID. And so again, we'll do the same thing. We'll get the next adjacent page IDs, passing in the page ID index and the direction of 1. And then the next thing we want to do is once we get that next ID from the array from Forge storage, we want to call fetch page with that next ID and get the information for the next page. And then just to show how it's working, we're just going to update the UI component here just to display next page, that title, so that we can see that we did something other than nothing. So I saved the page here. So one thing we could do here is we could use Forge Tunnel. Now Forge looks like it's working. There was a launch darkly error. It's interesting. We'll see if this works. There was an issue earlier today with Forge Tunnel, so I don't know if that's a artifact of that or not. But if not, we could always fall back to Forge deploy, Forge install. But what Forge Tunnel allows you to do is sort of like we're just running ngrok or not ngrok. There's the Node watch type of thing where every time you make a save to the file, this will repackage, redeploy it, and you can just then go back to the page and update the code. This only works if you're doing simple code changes, like if you make any manifest changes like to scopes, you don't have to do a Forge deploy and do a reinstall again. But so we're listening for requests now. So we can go back here, and this will probably be unexciting and say testing new app again, because we only have one page in the page ring. Let's add another page and just call it another page. And if we call else page ring, add another macro, we're adding another page to the page ring here. And so because we're on another page, our macro is displaying the next page in the page ring, which is testing new app. So there's only two here. Let's add a third one just so we can, when we get to the next hands-on, we can actually see, you know, three pages is the minimum you need for a page ring, so that you can have a unique previous and a unique third or a unique next page when you show the page ring. So browse page ring. Right, publish. Okay. So if I go to another page, I will get third page. That's the next one in the page ring. If I go to testing new app, I should see another page there. So we can see we're getting the next page in each of our options. All right, let's go back to our keynote slides. All right, last thing on our agenda, and this one is I think the easy one. So depending on which Atlassian product you're building for, there are a number of different modules available to extend the product. And you can choose between common modules or product specific modules. Again, we're going to be using UIKit. UIKit is a collection of predefined styled components that make it really easy to create basic UI that match the Atlassian style. So each component is described using declarative markup language, which can be added to the index.jsx file of your app. Confluence has a number of product-specific modules. There's content action, content byline, menu, content, global page, space page, just to name a few. Macro, we're going to be using that one. Just there's the whole list there, and the reference material you can see at the docs at the bottom. Just a few examples of what these things look like. So content action, you can add, here is the example here, you can add a menu item to the meatballs icon there on the side. You can see these screenshots are a little out of date, but basically the same, it's the same functionality. So content action would add functionality to that menu. We could have content menu here, which is adding functionality to, like, say you highlighted a word and the menu comes up, you can add hello world to that content menu. We're going to be using the macro component here to insert dynamic content into the UI via the editor. So we've been using all of the hands-on so far. We've been using the macro to at least display the variables that we have. But we're going, in this section here, we're going to expand that and start getting a little bit more, adding more components so that we can actually display what we want in the right UI of how we want it to look. So here, when we did the initial import of our template, this was the code that was in index.jsx. And so what we're doing here is we're creating an app function, we're constructing our app, and that app function is returning the fragments or the components that we're going to display, and which you can see is being exported and run and rendered down below. And we're rendering out our macro component, and it's being fed the returned fragment from the app above here. We'll find out more about the macro and the docs there at the bottom. But let's just go through some of the components that we're going to need. For instance, fragment. Fragments is not something that you would typically see in HTML, but because a function, the app function, can only return one top level component. Fragment, basically a hack or a component, is used for wrapping a list of top level components. So this, think of fragment like a div component or a div element in HTML. It's just a way to wrap everything into like a top level body sort of set of components that we can return easily in one component. So everything should have at least fragment, and we'll see that in our examples here. All right, it wouldn't be the 90s without some table-based layout. So kids, ask your parents about that. So when we declare a table has a table element, has a row, has many rows, one row, many rows, and one cell or many cells. And so again, nothing drastic here. Table, row, cell. The only difference here being there should be cell, not text. That's copy and paste there. But you open your table, you can close your table. If you know HTML, this should be fairly simple. Any kind of text that you need to display needs to be wrapped into a text component. We saw that in all of our other hands-on stuff. We had fragment and then text within it, and then we had our variables that we were trying to display. Here, we're creating a link component, which needs to be wrapped around a text component. So link is a subchild type of component of text. So whenever we want to have a link, we need to have it within a text component. So here we're declaring a link. We're having its appearance be like defaulted, like words with a line under it, and then we're giving it an href, where we're hard coding wiki. I've asked the team about this, if there's a way to actually get like the little bit of URL /wiki, and there doesn't seem to be. So I've hard coded it for now. It feels dirty, and I'm I've been scrubbing myself since I've added that into my code. But I'll be working with the Confluence team there to see if we can figure out a way to how we get that information dynamically, because right now I don't think that's possible. But each Confluence instance, you could have /wiki. This is preference to the instance of every Confluence instance. So in our developer instances, we'll need /wiki, so we can put that in there. We're going to get the web UI link from the results of our fetch page response. And so we can say page._links.web UI will be the rest of the URL that we need. And then we can have the text of our link be the page.title. Now, to use all of these components, we need to declare them. And so back to our Forge UI import statement, we saw all these before. We saw render and fragment and text and macro. All of those were declared from our template. But now we'll need to declare table, row, cell, link. Any component we're going to use, we need to declare in an import statement. Okay. Last collaborative hands-on, but we're going to use UI kit components to create a table with links for previous and next, and display that on our page. All right, next thing we need to do is we're going to get rid of that text component. We're going to add a table. We're going to add a row. We're going to add some cells. Add a text. Add our link for our previous. Have it appear as a link. We're going to get the previous page from our call up above earlier. Get the web UI link from the response. Again, also previous page, that title, that is from the call from fetch page up above here, that from the previous step. We're gonna have another cell here, just call it the Confluence page ring, just to sort of title the macro. And then we are going to call another cell, have another text component. And our last link here is doing the next page from the next page response, getting the web UI and the next page title. And then Visual Studio was trying to be nice, trying to be friendly here and added all of the end tags. So let's get rid of all these. We don't need these. All right. And so that is our component sort of structure that we need. So we'll have a previous link, a title, and next link. And then the last thing we need to do here, we're not quite done yet, was we need to go up into our import statement and declare all of our components that we haven't declared yet so far. So table, row, cell, and link. Now, if I save this, you can see down in the terminal that Forge storage or Forge tunnel started reloading the code, running a lint. It's bundling up the code. It will deploy it, listing for requests. And now, if I go back to one of my pages here that has this macro on it and reload it, you should see our page ring here with our previous third page, our next another page. If I click another page and I go to another page, I see the web page ring here again, and our third page is next. You click on that, we can go back, previous page, go back to another page. There's a component. There's our app that we've built. We've built a page ring from the 90s. Nostalgia. All right, guys, that's it. That's all I've got for you today. I hope you got something out of that, how to build a basic Confluence Forge app macro, and how to add some business logic to it and get it running. So thanks for your time.